Okay, evening everybody. Welcome to Startup Grind Dublin. My name is David Scanlon. I'm the chapter director here, and I'm also the part of the venture investment team with NDRC. NDRC is Ireland's leading early stage investor in digital innovation. This year we intend to invest in about 60 early stage companies through our investment programs ranging from between 30 and 100,000 euros. So if you're interested in coming to talk to me about our investment programs and how we can help early stage ventures, delighted to talk to you. There's actually a couple of teams here, including our speaker this evening. So Artomatix is an NDRC portfolio company, the first that we've had along to Startup Grind. But I'll call out another couple of teams who've come along here this evening if you want to have a chat about the program. So I'll introduce our speaker this evening. As I said, we've been doing this since August 2015. We've had a real range of entrepreneurs, investors, key influencers in startup ecosystems come along, but I think that this evening, I don't use this word very often, but this is a unique speaker that we have here this evening. I don't know many people from Florida/Texas who are ginger, but we have one here this evening. I don't know many people who have PhDs in artificial intelligence and machine learning and computer graphics, computer science. There's quite a few of them there, but we have one here this evening. And I don't know many people who have built one of the world's leading companies that has raised nearly 3 million euros in the space of artificial imagination, but we have that man here this evening. So Dr. Risser is the founder and CTO of Artomatix. They are based here in Dublin. They have had an incredible journey through the startup ecosystem here in Dublin, going through pretty much every layer of support available as they've climbed to, well, not quite the peak, but they're definitely getting towards the peak of innovation at scale here in Dublin. So I would like you all please to be upstanding and put your hands together for Dr. Risser.
Thanks, guys.
Welcome.
Great to be here.
Thanks so much.
And thank you guys all for coming out tonight.
When I was preparing for this interview, I came down to your lovely new offices in the IT Grange Corman, and I saw two unusual things that you don't see on many startups' wall. One of those was a check for 100,000 euros from NVIDIA, so that's not usual, and the other was a set of bagpipes. I want you to explain both of those in any order that you prefer.
Okay, so so the check actually came from March 2015. We've done a lot of pitching competitions in the early days of Artomatix, even including TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco, and so that actually came from the NVIDIA's early stage challenge at the GPU Technology Conference, and in March 2015, and that was a really weird and cool day. Yeah, we won it. They gave us a big check for 100 grand, and that was really cool. The bagpipes was also a really weird day.
Did you spend 100,000 on the bagpipes?
Not just one set of bagpipes. You didn't see all the other bagpipes. The bagpipes. I just play the bagpipes. Actually, there is kind of a funny story there. We actually have a bunch of kilts and bagpipes in the company because we keep ending up in San Francisco on St. Patrick's Day for either the GPU Technology Conference or the Game Developers Conference. So 2 years ago, we actually won that check on St. Patrick's Day. And then the following year, we were at Game Developers Conference, and we had a booth, and so we all put on kilts because Americans don't really know the difference. And because like when you're doing a startup on a budget, and like you're at a video game conference, and there's just so much lights and noise, and so many things to fight for attention. Kilts and bagpipes are just like a really good and cheap way to get people's attention.
Or to piss everybody off, right?
Or that, what's that?
Were you playing the bagpipes or just like showing them off?
No, we actually didn't have them last year. Last year we did have the whole kilt get up though, and everyone seemed to love that. No, this was just in Edinburgh about 6 months ago on holiday, and I was like, I should get a set of bagpipes just so I have, just like a really crappy set of like tourist bagpipes, not like a real set. The kind of thing you don't mind bringing to a conference, and if it gets banged up, that's fine. So I figured this year when we inevitably go back and it's St. Patrick's Day, we'll be prepared.
Okay, thanks for that. So when I introduced the company, I used the hashtag that I think you guys use when you're tweeting out, which is this artificial imagination. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Artomatix and why artificial imagination is a good description of what you do.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, artificial imagination is kind of like a thing, a term I both love and hate, you know, because on one hand, like, what is imagination? Like, it's this very ill-defined thing. So, like, the academic in me, you know, finds it a little cheesy. But that being said, it is, I mean, what is artificial intelligence? You know, all of AI could kind of fall under that bucket. But basically, we're that aspect of kind of artificial intelligence that really focuses on, you know, simulating or at least mimicking kind of the creative process. I don't necessarily quote Steve Jobs, you know, but there is one quote I do really like from him, which is creativity is just combining things. You know, creative people just are really good at you know, basically taking their past experience and then just seeing how things fit together in new ways. And I think that's kind of a good summary of, you know, how we algorithmically try and, you know, simulate that process with computers. So it's all about looking at a bunch of data and then basically figuring out the signal from the noise plus the ratio of signal to noise, and then coming up with something new that essentially has the same signal but different noise. And that's kind of artificial imagination, you know, at a very high, you know, kind of theory level, I suppose.
So that was super high, super theory academic answer. Talk about how you actually apply that then to customers and why there are two rabbits mating on your t-shirt.
Oh yeah, because that's our tagline. So our beachhead is video games. So if you need to populate your game, we can do that for you faster. We're very classy. also
from the kids, right?
Yes. Also a good way to get people's attention at conferences. So, like we talked to Paul Hayes a lot about how to get people's attention very inexpensively, and he told me that a decade ago he was at Game Developers Conference for Demonware actually, and he had T-shirts that had two rabbits, you know, fornicating. To say fornicating because David said no cursing. And he said that it just, like, people loved it. It got super popular. They were reselling these T-shirts on eBay after the conference. So I was like, okay, yeah, sorted. we could probably do some kind of a rabbit gag. And yeah, it's been working.
So go back to the beachhead there about the video games.
Mm-hmm.
How you apply the Artomatix technology to that sector.
Sure. So elevator pitch, you know, we solve the problem that art creation costs too much and it takes too long in the video game and movie industries, and we do it through better technology. We have an artificial intelligence that can mimic human-like artistic creativity. So art creation is the biggest expense both in terms of time and money for basically all of the creative industries. Grand Theft Auto took 5 years and cost, I'm forgetting my pitching, but I think it was $335 million to create. So I mean, these games are just becoming, like, you know, not quite on the scale of like building the pyramids, but it's getting there, you know. I mean, some of these games people are having to manually build like entire virtual cities or virtual worlds, and yeah, it's for a while now been the biggest expense, and it's just going to keep getting worse because at the end of the day, you know, how large, how complex, how detailed these worlds are completely tied to like how big and powerful GPUs are, like graphics cards are, and you know how much memory they have. And I mean that just keeps going up exponentially. So like the need for art goes up exponentially. And yeah, it's just been kind of like destroying the game industry. All of the kind of mid-range games, you know, because they're so expensive to make now, everybody has to buy them, so they have to be hits. So pretty much all the games that aren't, you know, Tomb Raider or Grand Theft Auto or like Zelda, you know, the ones that are guaranteed to sell, you know, just 1 billion copies, like they just can't really compete anymore, because they will then look noticeably worse than the other games, which then just, you know, they fall further behind. So yeah, basically there's a huge problem in the game industry and movie industry, and really anyone who needs to build a big virtual world has this problem, so we solve it.
So I guess maybe stepping back a little bit then to the days when you first started looking at this research and this area of interest for you, did you foresee that gaming would be this beachhead? Did you understand at that point that the pain was so strong for that particular industry?
Yeah, no, actually, so I knew that this was a big problem in gaming, but we were actually looking at the movie industry first, mostly because I'm not really sure why, other than I just happened to like come out of academia and, well, okay, academics and graphics go to the same conference as kind of the movie, like the VFX and animation industries, like big powwow. It's called SIGGRAPH. So I just happened to already go to the same conferences as the movie people. So I was just like, so I kind of knew their industry a little better, and I was just a little more familiar with the people because I just happened to, go into the same kind of annual conference as them. So we originally figured that movies would be our beachhead. They have the same problem. Avatar again was 4 years and 280 million, I think, to make. So in each case we're looking at like $250 to $500 million and half a decade to make a big movie or game. So very much the same problem in movies. And think movies would be a bigger, posher, more money to throw around kind of industry. So we started off in that space, and we were proven very wrong very quickly. To the point where, like, we were actually had a meeting with the VC arm of Technicolor, and he straight up said, like, I would not invest in any company relevant to Technicolor. Like, VFX is a super unhealthy industry. This was right after Rhythm and Hues. They had just made Life of Pi, which super profitable, super successful movie, won every award, and bankrupted the VFX house, and they went under. So there's like, yeah, and then yeah, so like there's kind of, the VFX industry has some needs to kind of clean up themselves a little bit before they're really ready for, I guess, kind of an influx of startups in that space. So he said, so yeah, the VC guy at Technicolor said, look, the whole reason why Technicolor has a VC arm is we want to diversify out of VFX because it's such an unhealthy space. Go over to games. They have all the same problems. The requirements are lower. They adopt to new technologies quicker. So we did.
Maybe worth stepping back now and just talking a little bit then about that academic track that you were originally on, and what got you interested in the space. Maybe bring us to the point where you decide there's an opportunity here to do something more outside the academic space.
Oh, sure. So yeah, I mean, my plan, I think, during grad school was to be a professor. I mean, I think that was kind of what I'd been working towards for 5+ years at that point. Yeah, all through bachelor's, master's, PhD. It was kind of when I actually finished, and I kind of had to make that like decision to jump back into academia, to go do a postdoc, and then probably another postdoc, and then apply for a professorship, God knows where. I mean, and I don't know. At this point, gosh, I want to say 27, 28, something like that, and I don't know. I was also just kind of looking at like professors I knew now, because over a PhD you start to actually look at professors up close and actually see their lives, and I don't know, I guess I just didn't totally like what I saw, because you do all these postdocs, so you're basically traveling around from like city to city, so you never really set down roots anywhere, and then you become a professor, and if like you're in the States, then you have tenure, so that means you have to just completely work your butt off for 7 years and hope that you get tenure for job security, otherwise they fire you on the spot, and then you have to go do another 7 years somewhere else and hope you get tenure there. So bottom line, it just kind of came off as like this super scammy pyramid scheme thing. Also like, I mean, I never did my PhD because I wanted to be a professor. Like I did my PhD and all this because I just liked the work I was doing. Like I just really liked this area, and I guess like going into the PhD, I thought like, oh, professor is like the ultimate job because you just get to do research for the rest of your life. And then you look at them and it's like, oh, no, they don't. Like, they mostly just write grant proposals and, go to conferences and stuff promoting their lab to people with money to beg for money. And they also, sit on university boards and teach classes. And so, I guess I was just looking at the job, and I guess I just got a little bit like, okay, I've basically like already hit the high point of my career, my research career at the PhD. So it's like, that just seems like a downhill thing. So, yeah, I don't know. I was just like, okay, what next?
Just maybe before the one next, just to pick up on something there. Do you think that there are many academic PhD candidates who are like that? That sort of like they see the tenure, they see this professorship ahead of them, and say, I'm going to do that anyway because of the security and stuff, like how many of them are like you that say, I just really wanted to get an opportunity to see this technology working or this innovation working? And what I'm trying to understand is, what was different about you? You know, what were you looking at the time? What was driving you to succeed at the time and said, I absolutely love this work? How did you know? There's loads of questions.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. Actually, I never thought about that. Yeah, I mean, I think every PhD student generally loves what they do, because otherwise they'd probably quit, because there's not much else in it. So, I mean, otherwise it's just a terrible life decision, right? If you don't just absolutely love it. So, I mean, I think people love it to some extent. That being said, okay, I'd say like there are a number of PhDs that go in loving it, and then after a few years, like if it doesn't work out that great, they kind of start to really hate it. And then they just want to finish their PhD and leave and never look back. I've definitely seen that type. Then I've seen people that just like really, really, really want to be professors no matter what. Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's all based on the individual. I don't know what makes me different or unique. Yeah,
I suppose because you haven't mentioned the third option, because as I said, you know, during the introduction, your area of research and your expertise is rare. You know, so I think the third option, and we talked about this previously, was go to Silicon Valley and you know, draw down massive checks and get to do the work you were doing. So again, what made you sort of veer away from that path?
Oh yeah, so actually, yeah, no, I probably would have done that if that was an option. Actually, at the time, like, so I don't know if you're all familiar with like Prisma and all of these, you know, new companies, and Facebook's in it now. Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff actually in artificial imagination, but this was early 2012, I want to say, when I turned in my thesis, and there was absolutely no demand for this in industry whatsoever. I mean, I would have loved to keep doing this in a research lab in industry, but there just were none. Nobody was really aware of it at the time. It was just too early. So I knew that this was going to be important. Like, I mean, I guess I just knew that in 10, 20, 30 years, this was just the way that art was going to be made, because there's really no other choice. Like, you just can't have, you know, human beings in front of like Wacom tablets and Photoshop, you know, being a graph that does this. Like, that just doesn't make sense. So I knew this was the ultimate future. So I knew there'd be a demand there. So I knew that, but at the time it was like, okay, I don't know if or when Adobe's ever going to get around to making this future, so I'll just do it myself, I guess was my thought process at the time. Yeah, I mean, if Adobe was doing my kind of thing seriously, I probably would have tried to just go there.
Okay. Can we just get a little bit more context about that time in 2012, because you'd obviously at that stage ended up in Dublin.
Yep.
And maybe talk a little bit about that experience of coming to Dublin and starting to understand maybe a different industrial setting or commercial setting here that you hadn't been exposed to before.
Oh, what do you mean?
Launchbox.
Oh yeah, so yeah, I was in Dublin. After I finished my PhD, I decided I could get a graduation visa for a year, and I thought, like, okay, I'm going to need a year to just put together a demo before I can start shopping this around to, you know, business partners or people with money, you know, investors or any of that. By the way, that's totally wrong. Don't do that. Just immediately start telling people your idea and shopping that around. Don't make anything unless you have to. In any case, I was a good, you know, I was a little shy of a year, maybe 8 to 9 months or so into that plan, and it obviously wasn't going anywhere, because just sitting around by yourself programming a computer never really does. Yeah, and then I happened to just get like, I happened to just randomly check my TCD email, not even like my real TCD email that, you know, is the computer science one, but like my general, just every student has a TCD email address. I have no idea why. I think I checked it all of like 4 times over the 4 years. But yeah, I did, and I happened to just notice this like Launchbox name, and I was like, that's a funny name, what could that be? So I happened to just like randomly click on it, and yeah, it was like, hey, are you a TCD student or a recent graduate who's trying to build a company, and do you need like mentorship, office, and money? And I was like, yeah, I need all those things. That is literally like of the Venn diagram of like what I need right now. That pretty much covers the whole thing. It's just one big circle. So yeah, so I applied and got in, and I'd say that was really kind of the inflection point where I kind of went from, having an ambition to do this thing to actually like knowing the steps I need to take to actually do it.
The previous year, because you mentioned something very interesting there in terms of just sitting by yourself. So you spend a year sitting in your underwear coding and not going anywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean,
largely. I mean, you probably built a product, right? But nobody knew about it.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, yeah, and like traveling, it's like traveling to shows and trade shows and things just didn't really make sense because I was. This was very startup. I mean, it wasn't sitting in my underwear. It was laying in bed in my underwear with a laptop on my belly, like eating ramen noodles. It was that whole thing. Yeah, I had a cheap flat up in Phibsborough, and yeah, that's where I spent the first year, kind of like coding up the prototype. Yeah, and I wasn't really shopping it around anywhere. I think at the time I was even calling it a project instead of a company. Yeah,
instead of project, right? It's a
yeah.
bigger one now.
Yeah.
What was keeping you going though at that stage? Like, and I don't mean noodles and sort of like getting to lay in bed and not do anything, but what did you see as the vision at that stage for the project that you were working on?
Oh, so
and actually, more importantly, when did you have a milestone that says this is never going to work, and I'm just going to give up and go home?
Yeah, so I guess my thinking was spend that year in Phibsborough, make the prototype, live my life. That's the reason why I stayed in Ireland after I graduated, because I had friends and a life here. Yeah, then inevitably run out of visas and move out to Silicon Valley and show everyone this thing I built. And I guess it was kind of like, my thinking was it would be binary, either they'd like it or they wouldn't. And if they liked it, I'd find a business partner and investors that would fund it, or just whatever. I guess I didn't really know. I was just like, I'll jump into this pit that is Silicon Valley and just see what happens. And if not, well, I mean, I have a PhD in machine learning from like one of the best schools in the world, and I went to another one of the best schools in the world. So I'm like, I'll just get a job then. Like I mean, it was very low risk for me because it's like at any point I could have just quit this plan and gotten a really good job. So
maybe for the people who aren't aware, maybe just talk a little bit about Launchbox and the format. You mentioned the sort of the three needs that you had, but what was the experience like for you going from your bed? I mean, you didn't bring the bed in.
Yeah, I tried to, but John stopped me at the door. Yeah, I totally didn't get it at the beginning. I mean, so Launchbox was very much kind of like the standard, Y Combinator formula, and I'd say it was really good because when you go for when you just don't know anything at all, like you don't even know up, down, left, right, like to get any kind of a bearing is just so. I mean, when you go from 0 to anything, to 1, it's like, oh, I just increased my knowledge of this by infinity%, So I mean, I was reading some things on the internet about starting companies, but the internet is such a weird way of getting information, because you only really get the stories that are outliers, both good and bad. You only get like these ridiculous success stories, and you only get these like ridiculous failures, like that one person who recently had the totally fictional, I don't know, insulin company or something that raised 600 million and it was all fake. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, like you only get stories like that when you read the internet, and so I knew that. I mean, I have enough of a background in stats that like I know that pretty much everything in life follows a bell curve for the most part. Maybe there's some skews sometimes, but for the most part that's how it works. And you just read these things online and like, okay, I'm only getting like the two extreme ends of this that are a few standards a deviation away from the norm. So I'd say what was nice about Launchbox is it really just gave me some real actual information kind of in the norm. I could actually talk to people that actually did companies, and especially some people that had done a few, and some worked, some didn't, and just I mean, I guess in some ways it filled the niche that like Startup Grind fills, and that it's just like, here's how you just normal people just start companies.
So, other than the Theranos outliers, what was your sort of your understanding or your view of entrepreneurship before you went into Launchbox, and did it shift much through that experience? I know you said you met a couple of people. Who did you meet?
Oh, well, let's see. So I guess my understanding of Launchbox, or of entrepreneurialism kind of going to Launchbox was, yeah, I mean, it's that it's like this very, it felt a little bit like, being an entrepreneur is like buying a lottery ticket or something. Because you read online, it's like, okay, 20 dating apps went out of business, and one for some reason got bought for $20 billion, and you know, you don't know why, so you're like, okay, did that person just have a cuter logo than the others, or you know, like, is that all this is just roll the dice? And then you have Silicon Valley, where like legitimately weird things do happen, where that kind of stuff does happen, you know. And I mean, there's always outliers and weird things happen, but I mean, I guess my understanding was that I can't trust anything I know. that was just my intuitive understanding of entrepreneurialism at the time was, you know, I don't know what it is, but I know that it's not this stuff. And you know, the people I met at Lunchbox, you know, yeah, John Whelan, and who's been there, done that. Yeah, Sean Blanchfield, Stuart Colson, you know, and a number of others. You know, Brian Caulfield, of course, came in and gave talks. So just, you know, it was nice to talk to real people that did things, and, you know, they weren't like, oh yeah, we were unicorns, and, you know, the road to success is keep raising more and more money and never make anything. You know, like, I mean, these were like real businesses that are like, yeah, we grew it to, you know, you know, 10 million or so, and then exited. And I mean, that's how most of these things happen, you know.
Did your ambition change then? Yeah, from that year again, from when you were just working on product, and it was that excuse me, that binary idea, it's either going to be amazing or not. And then when you went to Lunchbox, did what you think success excuse me, might look like change?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely my expectations changed. I mean, I find like that's life though. Like your expectations always change, or wherever you're at in life, they're just this constantly fluid thing. But I don't know. I'm trying to remember. Like back in Lunchbox, I think my goal was to just, more than anything, just get a product out there that my industry would look at and just acknowledge as, yes, this is a thing that we want, you know, that this is a good thing. I think, you know, just get some vindication that like the last year of my life making this prototype wasn't just a total wasted year of you know, that I just did for no reason. So I think that was probably my main goal during Lunchbox. I mean, obviously, you know, make money and grow and all that was kind of a goal, but I mean, it was one of those goals that I just felt was like too far away to even worry about at the time. It was more just like get some positive, you know, validation was I guess my main goal, and I did. You know, I went out and showed it to people, and they liked it and said, yeah, this is exactly what we need. I mean, maybe not this form factor, it's awful, but you know, because you know, I programmed it in a vacuum, so it's obviously terrible user interface and yeah, just super dodgy. But yeah, no, like I then kind of knew like at a high level it was a good idea. So I'd say like Lunchbox is one of those things where, I mean, again, I guess this is why you know, David invited me to Startup Grind, because it really was a grind. You know, it was never like I had this big eureka moment and then Artomatix instantly became a unicorn. It's you know, it was just a whole lot of work, and it was a lot of showing stuff to people, getting their feedback, incorporating that feedback, showing it to them again, going iteration after iteration after iteration, and slowly it turns into a thing that kind of resembles what they wanted. I was actually, I'm going to quote the guy who founded Netflix, because I was at a talk he gave about a year or some change ago on one of my trips to Silicon Valley. And yeah, you know, he started, and this was kind of a similar tell us your story of Netflix. And, you know, he said this like really great thing, because, you know, he was like, you know, normally when people ask me how I started Netflix, they just want me to hear, like, they just want to hear me say like, oh yeah, I got a late fee once, and I was like, eureka, and then the rest was sorted, and we were instantly like super successful. It's like, but since I have you guys for an hour, here's what really happened. And then he just told us like this crazy story of ups and downs, and how they had to pivot a whole bunch of times, and almost went out of business, and just, you know, and it's like, okay, that sounds like an actual startup. Or it was great hearing that, because it actually reflected my own, you know, experience of like it's never that easy, and it's always easy to look at like startups when there are companies when they're already established and be like, oh, that was such a simple idea, you know, like rent movies through the post and then ship it back when you're done. But you know, the reality is like that was, even though that's such a simple idea, they went through like 100 iterations to get there, and they almost went out of business 3 times, and yeah.
It's a survivor bias, right? You look backwards and only see a success.
Yeah.
So let's maybe explore some of those birthing pains of Artomatix, because at that stage you'd gone into Lunchbox just as Eric,
Mm-hmm.
You're 17 people here, and a lot of them here this evening.
Hey guys.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about growing the company and starting to bring in the key pieces that you needed to turn a product that no one had seen before into something that people actually might use.
Sure. So during Launchbox, I realized that one thing I really needed was a CEO. I'm just like clearly a CTO. Like that's just clearly what I am. So I never really had any illusions that I'd really be anything but that. But obviously finding a CEO is hard. You know, what bars do they go and hang out at? You know, who knows? But you know, because like
they come to grind.
I see. Like I didn't know about grind back then. I didn't know about anything before Launchbox. Yeah, actually, I didn't know about any of the startup community here in Dublin, which, looking back, is just like, I mean, that would have taken me literally 5 minutes in Google to just like know about all this stuff. But I guess, you know, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. So yeah, in any case, so I knew that was a crucial ingredient, was get somebody to handle the business side of the business. You know, tech is where I did my 10,000 hours. That's just clearly what I should do. Then obviously you need to raise money, because then you can't really do anything without that. Yeah, so I mean, those are, I guess, like the two main ingredients is get people to kind of fill in the holes in your experience and training and aptitude, and get money to bootstrap things, to build the thing that you really should build and promote it.
What were your thoughts then when you started on that journey of fundraising? You know, because this is maybe you've a lot of experience of grant applications and pulling down money from big organizations, but venture is very different. How did you go out and start selling your idea?
Yeah, and well, so I guess the way we sold it is at a very coarse level, because, you know, when we started, we hadn't really locked down the actual product market fit yet. So it was very much like, we have this huge problem, which is that these games and movies cost, you know, an insane amount of money to make, and it's getting worse. And we have this very coarse level solution in that we have this this AI that can kind of you know, automate a little bit of the more tedious and mundane aspects of kind of making 3D art assets. And so I mean, everybody generally likes that pitch. And you know, even like venture capital is a weird animal, and it's also there's many different breeds of that animal that let's just say they've evolved apart from each other into new species around the world. Like you've got your Silicon Valley VCs, which are very different from your local Irish VCs. You know, local Irish VCs are very traditional business. They want to know what you're, you know, they're more interested in, you know, what's your current revenue, what's the projections, you know. They're very much, you know, traditional in that sense. Whereas in Silicon Valley, sometimes you find people that, you know, if you just say, hey, I cured diabetes, you know, give me, you know, 600 million, yeah. And then they're like, oh, cool, can you just like show us your math, and so I prove that you cured diabetes? They're like, no, it's a trade secret. How do we know you weren't working for our enemies or whatever? I don't know how the hell they raised, oh, sorry. Heck, they raised 600 million. But I mean, stuff like that happens in Silicon Valley, and that just kind of shows, you know, the mentality that that some, obviously not all Valley investors are like that, but just the general shifts in attitudes you get around the world. Like some people are more interested in potential, and other people are more interested in well, I guess it's just risk to reward, you know, profile. Some people want that hyper risk, hyper reward. Some people have a lower risk reward kind of profile. So yeah, just different all around.
I guess I'm you know, interested in even understanding how you started building a relationship with your investors, because, you know, up until this point, notwithstanding maybe you brought on a couple of people with specific skill sets to help grow the company, this is an idea that you've been working on for essentially 5 years, right, through all of your research, and then through the year in your bed, and then for the first time you're starting to bring in external advisors who you can't just say you're wrong, you know, because they're invested in you. How did you feel as you started getting into that kind of relationship with them?
Oh, I mean, we've generally been pretty picky with our investors. So like our first investor was NDRC for 100K, and yeah, I mean they weren't. I mean, it wasn't like they were an investor where they tell us to do something we disagree with, and we'd have to be like, you're wrong. No, it was more like, it was more like we were coming to them being like, what do we do? Give us instructions, master, you know? Like, here's our terrible business plan, rewrite it for us, you know, like, no, I mean, I think they were like, oh god, those Artomatix guys, like, why did we invest in them? They won't leave us alone. So, I mean, I'd say, like, with NDRC, it was really the opposite. We were just like, I mean, we take all the help we could get. Yeah, I mean, I haven't necessarily hit the point where I feel like I know more than the people that advise me. So, you know, on the business side. So, I mean, there's very few times that I disagree with advisors, and when it happens, it's usually, you know, the rare times it does happen, it's usually because, you know, I have some extra bit of information that they don't necessarily have, and then when I share that with them, they're kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. That makes sense then. So yeah, we don't necessarily have that. In terms of our investors, like we've also been super lucky on investors in that, I want to say like, gosh, so we have a bunch of angels. We've got one venture capitalist. We've got NDRC. I'm not sure what they'd be categorized as because they aren't really either of those things.
Pre-seed investor.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, and then, but I'd say a huge bulk of our money came from like winning awards and grants. So I want to say like almost 2 million of our money is just like free money we got from the EU through applying for various grants and programs, and like that check on the wall that you saw, that things like that. Actually, we got a ton of money. So if you're doing like some crazy out there sci-fi startup, that's really good for getting free money from the governments and companies. Well, that's one thing where I think we have a competitive advantage in terms of like begging for money is that we have just this inherently cool thing we do that people seem to like.
So, you know, most of the entrepreneurs that I meet say, I've got this inherently cool thing that I want to talk to you about. Not many of them draw down €2 million from the European Commission, or you know, to get that free money to help them grow. So, can you talk a little bit about the engagement that you had with the customer side? Because you must have, you know, polished up the product at some point and brought it out to show it to customers. How did you start that engagement? How did you start picking the companies that you wanted to show to and hearing them?
Oh yeah, so I mean, it basically started off as you know, a spray and pray. It was like let's just send out emails wildly to everyone, and you know, go on LinkedIn and find people at like AAA video game studios and movies and be like, you know, find some random person that they were connected to, be like, oh, I was talking to Jim and he said that I should, you know, reach out to you and that you'd be interested in this, you know. So do those kind of tricks, and then, you know, obviously like 90% of those emails don't ever get responded to, but some do, and then you get meetings. And so I remember we did a big trip out to California. We had like 70 meetings, I think, and yeah, a couple things stuck. A couple people were like genuinely really interested. You know, most are just kind of like, okay, it's more of a show and tell, and they're just kind of generally curious, but not that serious. But then a few are, and yeah, so I guess that's kind of how we I guess chose our initial, you know, our initial traction.
You at the same time you had limited resources, right? I mean, you couldn't hope that would to do it to sustain something like that. So did you go about narrowing the field and kind of go, these kinds of companies, this sort of spend? What was your, from a customer discovery perspective, did you talk about that a bit?
Sure. Well, I mean, we're kind of lucky because we're B2B, so we don't necessarily, like, there aren't like that many companies out there. In fact, it's more like, instead of like targeting companies, it was more targeting people and companies, because, you know, when you have a company like Ubisoft, I mean, that's a dozen studios, and even within a studio, you know, there's a dozen departments, you know, and who do you talk to? Do you talk to the tech department? Do you talk to the art department? Do you talk to the environment art department? Do you talk to the character art department? Like, you know, what job title and what department do you actually talk to infiltrate a huge organization? So it was less about targeting companies per se, and it was more targeting certain job profiles. And for us, it was tech artist is the magic profile. But it's a little trickier than that, because then our user isn't necessarily our decision maker, like our person who has authority to purchase things. So you kind of have to do this like top-down / bottom-up approach, where first you have to get the artists on your side, because if the artists aren't on your side, then it's DOA right there. But then once you get the artists inside, they champion you to the money people, and and then then you kind of have to wow them. So it's it's tricky. I mean, B2B sales is always really long and tricky. I guess but back then we weren't even thinking sales. It was more just like, let's just get somebody interested in this and using it. It was just like, let's just get feedback. And I mean, even our first relationship with a big AAA game company didn't go that well. They were super. This came out of this one trip, and they were super interested in our stuff. At the time, it was like hybridizing characters and props. So like the idea is infinite unique bad guys. And we partnered up. We had weekly calls with their CTO and lead tech artists. And I mean, technically the project went quite well. We made the thing they asked for, which was this thing that lived on a server on the internet that just kept spitting out new art assets for the multiplayer version of their game. So everybody in the world playing this game at the same time would get new bad guys for your main character to murder. And which is just like an inherently cool idea, like an infinite world that always changes, but it's a really cool idea, but it's not necessarily an idea you can put like an ROI behind. So once the project went well, that we were like, okay, cool, now that we have a prototype working, let's talk money. And then they're like, oh, well, actually, we don't know if this will help us sell more copies of insert game name. Obviously, I'm not allowed to name anyone, but and we're like, dang it. So then we're like, okay, during our many conversations, at one point, one of the guys mentioned that in the last iteration of their game, they had about 3,000 just textures, so just images that they map onto geometry, and they needed to just make it titleable. So like, if it just repeats over and over again, you don't see like this jarring seam line. And I was like, well, how long does it take you to like remove those seams? And he's like, half an hour to 2 hours, depending on how complicated the texture is. And we're like, oh, we can just like do that automatically. I'm like, then I did the math, and I'm like, okay, 3,000 times an hour each, like that's 3,000 hours. That's a man year right there. That's more than. So it's like, okay, like over the lifetime of a game, that's about an entire person's job. So I'm like, okay, how about we sell you a tool that removes seams and textures, And that's kind of how we started to move to our actual product and what it does now, which it removes seams and textures.
When you were starting out those conversations with those big unnamed AAA studios, how did you go about talking to them about the commercial and the business scale of or sustainability piece rather than the product piece? I suppose I'm trying to understand, how did you convince them that your product from a small Irish startup with an odd accented Irishman in Dublin wasn't going to fall over, that it wasn't totally sketchy? How did you kind of say, look, we're reputable? Yeah, I mean, I think you just got to go with like the Churchill quote there, like the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. I mean, I think like that's this inferior complex thing that just everybody has when they start out is like, okay, well, let me put it this way, like, I'd say the first couple years of doing a startup, you just feel like this huge fraud. Like the talent police are just going to come in and arrest you for just being completely full of crap. I'm still doing pretty good on the no cursing. There's a few times where I had to catch myself, but and I mean, I definitely think like the first few people you talk to customer-wise, you totally feel like that. Like, oh God, I hope they don't realize that, we're just a little startup in Dublin, and if we don't get funding, next year, then we're gone, But I think that you probably worry about it more than your actual customers do. I mean, yeah, they probably think about it. That probably crosses their minds. They probably assess that when they do the risk analysis on you. But I mean, at the end of the day, there's nothing you can really do about that concern in their minds. So I think just worrying about it yourself just makes it that much worse, because then you act nervous or squirrely, and I don't know. Like it's the sort of thing, like it is what it is. So if anything, you should just kind of like be aware of it and compensate for it. Be like, I know I'm afraid, so just like push that deep down and just put on the, stick out your chest and act big, and I don't know. I guess that's kind of my answer to that. Is we didn't really do anything. We just kept trucking along. So that makes sense for me from a founder perspective, particularly somebody who is the visionary, right? I mean, like you were selling something pretty revolutionary to these people, and you've got that fanatical sort of evangelistic sort of role. It's like, this is the future. I'm backing it because this is my research. How did you convince other people to join the team and go on that journey with you, though? Because the bunch of people who you've hired and you've grown the company with, that's not their baby. And saying fear, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Those people had salaries and stuff that you can't pay for with fear, right?
Sure. Well, I'd like to think that everybody who joined Artomatix, and I mean, yeah, maybe this isn't like something that they spent their lives researching, and it's and it's their babies per se, but I still think like, well, I don't think anybody joined Artomatix who didn't like care about what we were doing. Like, I actually think that's probably like we actually have incredible people in Artomatix. I mean, I look at other startups and I'm just always wowed by just how wonderful our staff is, and I think it's because I think they were also all drawn to the vision of what we're trying to do and want to be a part of it. I actually, I mean, even actually, we had this startup competition in Paris called Hello Tomorrow, and actually we ended up picking up 2 employees because of the pitch I gave there. So I mean, I guess that's like just a direct example of I literally only talked about the vision, and then I had 2 people that are like, we want to come and do that too, and yeah, we're going to move from Paris to Dublin and do that. So yeah, I think I don't know. I really think that the employees also just love what we do, and yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about recruitment, if you don't mind, and
sure.
Your own involvement in it? How do you go about screening people? Because look, it's usually the place where most early stage teams fall down, is that they spend too long with the wrong people. Mm. So do you have any particular methodologies or processes that sort of like, this person is going to come into our team and we're going to test them this way and embed them this way, and this is a good way to weed people out?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess we do have a little bit of a weird kind of screening process, and I can't necessarily say it's like the best possible screening process ever. We're like doing anything overly clever. It's more just what feels intuitive, and so far seems to work relatively well. So the standard, and I don't know about business actually, because I actually am not part of the recruiting side on the business, just tech. But I guess that I haven't really been to a lot of job interviews because I went career academic directly into Artomatix. But I have a lot of friends who have, and all through like a decade of computer science, I just constantly heard friends complaining about applying for job interviews as programmers. Because the general formula, from what I understand, is you go in and, well, first it starts off with a phone call where, it's some kind of pop quiz where they just generally test your background knowledge in math and stuff. And then they invite you in for a face-to-face where, pop quiz, hot shot, here's a whiteboard and a marker and write code. And it's like, who writes code on a whiteboard? With like 4 people like all staring at you and being weird, and like, yeah, and you can't use Google, and you can't search things, and a lot of times like they either ask you like these silly brain teaser puzzles, which you can totally just like research beforehand and know the answer to going into these things. So I mean, I feel like I always felt like the standard interview process was just this really weird thing, because it's like, okay, it doesn't, like, I get the brain teaser thing because maybe that finds smart people, but the reality is I think there's a lot of different kinds of smart in this world, and I don't think like you're being good at brain teasers necessarily means like you're universally smart at everything. I think it just means you're good at brain teasers, and I mean, a lot of these brain teasers, like there are websites dedicated to, hey, if you want a job at Google, here's like all of their brain teasers that you need to like memorize, and once you like the trick, then okay, and you can do that. Or they ask you like, oh hey, remember quicksort? Yeah, write out the algorithm to quicksort, and you're like, no, I learned that in like my first ever programming course. Like ever since then it was like like boost.quicksort, it's like, obviously I don't know quicksort. Like if you look it up on the internet, you'll be like, oh right, yeah, that, that's the trick. So I don't know, this whole like pop quiz, no resources, see how you do under pressure. I mean, programming just isn't that intense, like, I guess, so like you're very rarely under like pressure with lots of people staring at you, being like, you have to get the right answer or else. Like, this isn't the movie Swordfish. Come on, like. So yeah, I guess like my view is, okay, if I'm going to be working with people, I want to actually like simulate as closely as possible what working with people would be like. So we generally like our entire interview process more or less boils down to one project. And it's a programming project that, well, first we have one interview from the business end of the company, which just kind of gauges people in terms of like the softer side of people, you know, attitude, interests, you know, just to see if that aligns. Then the next interview is with tech people, and you know, me and or our lead engineer Tom. And then we just kind of understand people's backgrounds, you know, what they've worked on, you know, where their experience is. Because at the end of the day, like, you don't necessarily want to give somebody, you know, you don't want to give somebody a test that's just wildly outside of, you know, their realm of expertise, because then they'll just obviously fail it. So, I mean, I think like as an interviewer, you have a responsibility to try and bring the best out of people and try and gauge that rather than just like pop quiz them and fail them. Like, it shouldn't be a weed out process. It should be like identify, you know, great things in people process. So and I mean, obviously we aren't perfect at that, and I don't claim that we're geniuses at this, but generally, yeah, we try and get a general feel for, you know, where their aptitude is, and then we find something that we've already done in the Artomatix code base that took about 2 days to do the first time, and then we just have them redo that. We basically just write up a spec on like what we need done, and it should take about 2 days, and yeah, and then we tell them, hey, like, you can come in, like, you can ask questions, you can use anything you find on the internet, you know, you can even use, like, open source code as long as it's like BSD or something that isn't, you know, antagonistic towards companies. I'm like, yeah, you can use whatever you can find on the internet, you can ask questions on forums, you can come into the office, work with us, ask us questions, you know, because at the end of the day, like, it's not a pop quiz, it's not a test, it's really more of a simulation. And yeah, I think, I don't know, I like that simulation aspect. Like, it's a big ask on people, because yeah, like two days isn't like a trivial amount of time, and it can be longer than that.
It's a big ask of the company to put that amount of effort into that screening and the effort around building up the spec and you know, creating that environment that people can do it. So, you know, conscious that there's people in the room that have been through this process, and you may not want to answer this one, but has it ever gone wrong? Has that process failed you? And what does that feel like?
Well, I'd say. I won't say we've ever hired somebody that I feel like we shouldn't have out of that process. I'll say that I've messed up the kinds of things I've given people, where like I've given tests that were just like way too hard and I didn't realize it. Yeah, so sometimes you mess that up. And on the flip side, sometimes we've given tests that are way too easy and didn't realize it. Yeah, like I said, I'm not saying we're super great at this, but it's what we do, and so far, I mean, I don't know, it makes intuitive sense to us, and it generally seems to work pretty well. And just the pop quiz style of interviews just doesn't make sense to me, so, yeah.
Okay. So I've definitely talked for way too long, so up here at the top of the room, so I'm going to open it up to the floor for some questions, if anybody has them. So if you just shout out, the room is small enough, we should be able to hear you.
Just one. Procedural generation, your opinion on that. Is it the future or a failure?
Oh,
questions that anybody else might understand. Make sure your question is actually a question, though. That's a good tip.
I do have a lot of opinions on this, actually, but yeah, I see David's point. I don't know, we can just talk about this afterwards if that's, I don't know, raise your hand if this is interesting to you.
Okay, so one person. Wow. Nerds United, get out of the room. Great question. Thank you.
All right, we'll chat about this later.
Anyone else?
Did you patent your idea, or how did you go about that?
All right, the question is, did you patent your idea?
Oh yeah, not that promptly, but yeah, we have patents. the thing about patents is, you know, this is a little bit of a controversial view, but I'm generally not a huge fan. They're more like the sort of thing you just kind of have to do for investors and your down the line exit scenario. I actually don't think that patents really protect like they just don't seem to be designed around startups. They seem to be like the whole system just seems to be designed more in favor of big companies. Yeah, so like patents, the process is going to cost about 10 grand, and it'll take years, and you have to tell everybody everything you do. And if they decide to steal your patent, or just like it costs about 10 million to sue them. So I mean, it's just something that, like, obviously, as a startup, it's like, okay, this is 10 grand, which is, you know, a pretty big expense for, especially if you're a company that only raised 100 grand, you know. So like that's you know, 10% of your overall wealth just to tell the world what you're doing, and then you have no hope of defending it legally. So it's like, patents kind of sound like an insane thing to somebody first starting out, you know. But then as you go and you talk to VCs and you become a little wiser to the world, you realize that you know, basically there's no end game without patents. I mean, even VCs don't want to fund you because they don't know if you'll have it. So basically, like, at the end of the day, two things happen to startups. They either IPO or they get sold. And in either case, like, well, I don't know about IPO, but generally if you get sold, bigger companies won't buy you unless your IP is super clean. Because the last thing they want to do is buy a startup with bad IP and then get sued by somebody else who was just waiting for that startup to, you know, be sold, and then, so they could go after Apple or whoever and be like, ah, ha, ha, now you stole our IP. You know, because like people won't go after startups who steal IP because, you know, startups generally don't have any money. But, you know, the moment that startups get sold, then they go after. So yeah, so big companies just don't buy startups that don't have clean IP, and the way you can make your IP the cleanest is have patents on it, because then it's just undisputed that it is in fact your IP. Yeah, so I mean, IP isn't necessarily a thing to protect your idea from getting stolen by someone else. It's more a thing to prove that it's your idea so somebody doesn't come after you. And then investors obviously won't invest in you unless there's a chance that you could, like, if they know that, like, nobody will ever buy you because your IP isn't solid. So basically that trickles down and you have to get patents. But I'd say that shouldn't be your first concern when you're first starting out. Just don't tell people your secret sauce, and yeah, just keep it trade secret as long as you possibly can. And then, like, if it starts getting traction and it starts seeming serious, or you get, like, when you start, like, going down the fundraising cycle, especially with the VC, yeah, just get those patents in order. It's just a perfunctory thing you do.
Great. Nisha?
When did you have the feeling you're ready for all the venture capitalists? How was that process evolving?
Yeah. I don't know, is anybody really ready for venture capital? I mean, it's like I wouldn't necessarily say I woke up one day and I'm like, today's the day. I mean, so I mean, again, I already said it, you know, venture capital is a bit of a weird thing, and it's always a little bit of a there's always a danger in venture capital, and a lot of people don't talk about it. Like one of the weirdest things about, you know, hypey startup world is that everybody always talks about how much they raised, and nobody ever talks about, like, what great terms they got, you know? Like, and I always thought that's weird when people are like, oh, so-and-so just raised $20 million, and everyone's like, whoa, they must be super successful. And then, like, you look at their term sheet and it's like, oh yeah, the VCs get 50% of the company, and they can replace any senior management whenever they want, and they have 10 board seats, and, you know, like, I don't know, like, for me it's always been about the T's and C's. And the thing about venture capital is that while it can be incredibly helpful, if you get the right VC, it can also completely destroy your business if you get the wrong VC. So no business ever goes perfectly wonderful 100% of the time. So if it did, then, you know, all VCs would be sweetness and light, and everybody would win and be happy. But the reality is, you know, it's a roller coaster. Like, it's up and down. There's a lot of variance, and the question is, how does your venture capitalist react when you have a bad day? You know, do they say, okay, we're gonna gut you for parts and sell those parts, you know, to so-and-so, and we have, you know, like, do they do that? Or do they say, okay, you fell on you're having a bad week, you know, let's jump in and help you out. Let's help broker a deal for you. Let's get you some revenue in, you know. And I mean, that's I think the tough thing when you go talking to venture capitalists, because, you know, obviously everybody talks like the money's the easy part. The money is just like it's money. Like everybody knows how that works. You know what you're getting. You know what you're buying into. But then they all try and sell you on the bonuses that like the fringe benefits that they're gonna we'll shop you around to all these great companies and we'll do all these great things to grow you, and you don't really know what you don't know if they're gonna be great or not, and so that's inherently scary because at the end of the day VCs need to make like probably a 10x return on you. Like that's what they're looking for. Like they're looking for a growth that just doesn't really make sense anywhere outside of some crazy new tech thing or some entertainment company. Basically, unless you're like some crazy new revolutionary technology or you're like some kind of like new form of entertainment that could go viral and become the next kind of entertainment or communication platform. Like there's very few things that scale up to be like 10 or like 10x growth per every 2 years. Like things generally don't do that like normal businesses, and so I'd say like we've generally been timid around VCs because I've always taken that to heart. Like I don't necessarily want to tie myself to a VC unless I'm sure I can deliver on a 10x growth, because if you don't, like it won't end well for you. So I'd say unless you're absolutely certain that that's your game plan, because you close a lot of doors when you go with a VC. Like if you think that this is going to turn into something that could make you $2 million a year, which for most people is a wonderful business, like a VC will not be impressed. Like a VC would consider that a failure, and they might try and destroy that business to sell it for scraps. So, yeah, I just say be very cautious with VCs, and I mean, they're like they aren't bad, obviously. Like they're great, and sometimes they're the thing that makes the business. And obviously, like I don't want to say don't go after VCs; they can be absolutely wonderful, but what I'd caution against is don't just chase the money. Don't just go for it because don't just be like, well, people go and raise 20 million, so I should go raise 20 million too. Like maybe that's not the right thing for your business. Maybe bootstrapping's a more sensible option, or just whatever. Like I said, most of our money actually comes from writing grant applications, and that worked out great.
So just as a follow-on question, if I may, after Nisha, as the founder of a far-out crazy revolutionary technology company, have you thought about exits? Has there been opportunity along the way?
Oh yeah, I mean we've had an exit, we've had an acquisition offer. We've had a merger offer. Yeah, I mean people bring things up. Now the question is, how serious do they? Are they really? I mean we've had a few people mention acquiring us, but I'd say only one that was actually like I'd consider like serious. I mean, so our chairman, I like what he says. He basically says like companies aren't sold, they're bought. So just worry about making a good company, and then at some point, like if somebody comes along who wants to buy it and you want your company to be bought by them, then do. If not, don't, and you'll have a solid company. So like you don't want to be like I guess what I'm saying is I philosophically am not sure I necessarily agree with kind of the formula that a lot of crazy tech companies do, where it's like, we got crazy tech, let's never build a product, let's never talk to customers, let's literally just build cool tech and try and acquire. That is definitely a thing that I've seen several startups do, so I know it's a formula that can work. I assume it's probably an outlier. I assume most people who do that, it probably doesn't work. I assume they probably just mostly run out of money and stop being a company. But I mean, it does work. In fact, our technological doppelganger, like the closest thing to Artomatix, Magic Pony, just sold to Twitter for 150 million. So yeah, I mean, it happens. But I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say that we're definitely not gaming our company around trying to sell. Like we're mostly just trying to be a good company that makes stuff people want. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the reason why I'm doing this company is because I wanted to keep working on this stuff, and it was never to get super rich. I mean, even when I started, I was like, okay, this is a terrible idea where I'm probably just going to waste a year of my life. It was more just I did it because I figured if I didn't, I'd be regretful when I'm an old man that I didn't give it a shot. So, I mean, I guess my attitude is I'm really just in it for the thing that we're doing, I'd say, more than you know, the ultimate fate of the company. And I honestly think that's probably the best way to sell a company. You know, unless you just want to try and, you know, play startup lottery and hope that you're one of the lucky ones, that something amazing just kind of happens. But I don't necessarily think you can game the system for that, and I think that a lot of times you look at that, it's survivor bias. Yeah, and yeah, that's about it really. Just, you know, maybe we'll get acquired. I don't know. Like I guess my rules for acquisition is, you know, if Adobe wants to buy us just to shut us down because they're threatened by this technology, then obviously it's no. But like if, say, Adobe was like, hey, we think this is the future and we want to make a whole new Photoshop completely based around, you know, this kind of technology, and we want you and your team to be like the core of this new greater division of Adobe that does artificial imagination, I'd be like, yeah, that sounds great, you know? Like, we get to do all the stuff we're doing, but now we have like vast resources and marketing, so great. So if it helps the cause, great. If not, yeah, probably not.
Oh, okay. Sorry, maybe you had just that question. Thanks.
Sorry, I rambled on too long.
We have time for a couple more questions. Do you want to shout it out there?
Based on your experience to date and just what you spoke about, if you were going to raise a next round, would you have a geographical preference where you would raise it and why?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So one, they're like, investors generally have, I mean, obviously every investor is different, but they generally have like different investment appetites depending on region. You know, there's different just cultures around investment. But in general, the formula is, so venture capital tends to geographically coincide with big companies that buy startups. Therefore, startups. So, like, there's a reason why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley. It's because it's got all the headquarters for these big, of Google and Apple and Facebook and Oracle and you know, Intel and Hewlett Packard and so on and so on. And these companies buy a lot of startups, and generally, big companies like to buy startups that are down the road from them. It's just, you know, it's just easier that way, honestly. It's as simple as that. You know, they can meet the founders whenever they want. They can, you know, get to know them. They can play golf or whatever. There's just more serendipity that happens if you all live together and, I don't know, go to the same Starbucks. And as a result, that's kind of where the venture capital then springs up as well. So, like, you definitely see, like, I mean, if you want to like profile biggest kind of venture capital hotbeds, it usually coincides with biggest mature companies that buy startups hotbeds, therefore also startups. So yeah, I mean, I think that like if we were gonna like so the plan is to probably raise around A, start spinning that up in about a year, and yeah, we'll probably look in London or the Valley.
Time for one or two more.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the process is like finding your CEO. Did you manage to find the bars where they hang out? And what the process is like and what the partnership is like?
Yeah, so it was actually NDRC again. So they had this program called Seed Lab, and I guess it wasn't a successful program because they've never done it more than once, but I liked it. So
you broke the mold.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, oh God, not another one. But yeah, they had, and actually it was John Whelan again posted a thing on Twitter or something, maybe sent out an email to everyone, but basically said, hey, there's this thing that NDRC are trying called Seed Lab. So they have this program called Venture Lab, which is specifically for kind of sci-tech startups. So if you have deep IP and expertise at the doctorate level in some space, then they invest in that, in sci-tech specifically, which is actually really cool because nobody does that. Like, that's not a category that people usually care about, which is another big part of the reason why I'm here and not in the Valley, is because that's kind of where I got bootstrapped, because that's just a great resource. In any case, they have trouble finding companies that fit that very specific mold of deep IP coming out of university research. So they thought they'd help manufacture a few teams. And they realized like there's a lot of kind of nerds with projects out there that don't know what they're doing. from a business standpoint. So like, okay, we'll do an open call to nerds with projects to come and pitch their projects, and then we'll have like a whole bunch of business people and that serial entrepreneurs and the sort, and we'll have them come and watch these pitches. And it was kind of done. Let's see. So it started off with we pitched, and then there was like a speed dating section, and then the business people voted on their favorite projects, and then based on that, we got to then pick teams round robin style. And in any case, after that day was done, I had 3 candidates that I got to then test for 6 weeks. So it was 6 weeks, 2 days a week. You go through the usual, lean canvas, yada yada, just your standard kind of startup-y things.
You give with one hand and then you just take away with the other.
Well, sorry if I sound cynical. Yay, lean canvas. No, just I've done it a few times at that point. And well, I think like I don't know, lean canvases. I think it would be better to do them if. Well, I think the problem is they have everyone do them a little too early, like before you have real information from the rest of the world. So it just I feel like lean canvases always come off as a super schizophrenic thing because you're basically
focus.
Oh right, sorry. But yeah.
I think this is why we brought in a CEO, right?
Yeah. But yeah, basically it was great. I got to work with 3 different people, and I kind of like chose them based on like maximizing variance in personality and background. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna get like 3 very different people. That way I can just like try this out. So it was 6 weeks, 2 days a week, no strings attached, go through all of these activities, ending with a big pitching competition thing. And yeah, afterwards I chose one and made him an offer, and that's Neil, and yeah.
There's time for one more question.
It's a simple one. How do you
You said that
not
last
reveal?
time.
Oh, sorry about the last one. How do you not reveal the secret sauce, but you have to present your idea?
That's good.
Oh, super easy. Like, so the reality is like nobody actually wants to know how your stuff really works. Like, you just kind of want to know like I mean, honestly, if I started telling people, they'd just be like, oh my god, why is this guy talking to me? So like, I mean, like, nobody really wants to read your thesis. Yeah, I mean, just give them like, I mean, I don't know, like pitching is a little bit kabuki theater, because it's like you take what you're doing and you just make it super high level, and I don't know, then you just kind of, I don't know, you make it more about, you make it then a little bit more sci-fi-ishy, and then I don't know, like make it a little bit science fiction, and then you just kind of turn up the volume on like the value proposition, and yeah, just So like nobody actually wants to know how your stuff works. Yeah, I was really worried about that when I started as well. It's like, how can I tell people about this without them just totally being able to steal it? But then I'm like, oh, most people don't understand what you're saying when you tell them, and then almost everybody doesn't care. Like startup competition, you pitch things, and even VCs like at the end of the day, they want to know what the opportunity is. Like they want to know what the impact is. It's less about how you're doing something, and it's more about why you're doing it and a little bit of what you're doing.
Great answer, and you totally redeemed yourself with a better question. So okay, I'm going to have to call a halt to proceedings because I'm starving, and you guys can't see it, but the food is just out there. So I've been sitting licking a pizza for the last 20 minutes. So I'd like to just take the opportunity to thank Eric for his candor here this evening and for not swearing. Thank you very much.